2 years ago, allegations of his sexual misconduct launched the Me Too movement in earnest. Now, a jury of Harvey Weinstein's peers has decided that he's a rapist. After weeks of graphic testimony from a handful of accusers and tough cross-examination from Weinstein's attorneys, the Manhattan jury announced their findings today: guilty of rape in the third degree and guilty of committing a criminal sex act in the first degree, but not guilty on 3 more serious charges: rape in the first degree and 2 counts of what's called predatory sexual assault, the latter of which carries a sentence of up to life in prison. The charges he was convicted of carry a minimum of 5 years and a maximum of 29 years behind bars. And Weinstein, whose lawyers say they plan to appeal, is also facing charges in Los Angeles, where prosecutors there say he raped 1 woman and sexually assaulted another. After today's verdict was read, the New York Times reports Weinstein said to his lawyers 3 times, "But I'm innocent." But he's not. So what does this mean for Me Too and other survivors of sexual assault? Joining me are Middlesex District Attorney Marian, who once served as the chief of the office's domestic violence unit. District Attorney, it's good to see you. Thanks for being here. Gina Scaramella is the executive director of the Boston Area Rape Crisis Center. Gina, good to see you too. What are the implications of this verdict for anyone other than Weinstein himself, meaning would-be predators, other survivors, Gina?
Well, speaking from the survivor perspective, I think it's a moment where survivors feel maybe some justice was done that is public, that is taking someone who seemed above everything and was able to finally be prosecuted.
To the point where it inspires some who might otherwise not come forward to come forward?
I think so. I think that these kind of move the needle moments do make a difference all the way to people who are very far from Hollywood.
Do you agree with that?
I do. I think one of the other things that's important about this, and it really provides a teachable moment for some conversations, is throughout that testimony of the women that were at the heart of the offenses he was found guilty of, you saw not only them talking about what had happened to them, but saw a cross-examination that brought out lots of things that I think we all maybe have an idea of how I would react or how a victim would react, and this was a much more accurate picture.
I'm so glad you said that. It seems to me that that is in many ways the most important thing here. I'm no fan of the Manhattan DA. I mean, most people know this is the guy who, even though there was a wire on a woman who said she was groped by Harvey Weinstein, and he basically admitted, didn't prosecute it. His office attempted to reduce the sex offender status of Jeffrey Epstein. However, I think he nailed it here. Here's what he said right after the trial, after the verdict. With his verdict, this is Vance: "I hope that survivors will see that in this justice system, prosecutors, judges, and juries will believe them, even when the facts are not simple, even when the dynamics of the relationships between the survivors and the abuser are complicated." So I think the message is this is a big day, it's a new day, and I hope women will understand the significance of the jury verdict today. I mean, my sense, I obviously don't do what you do, but you hear lots of prosecutors in candid moments say, maybe they won't use the term, I know that offends people, that we're looking for the perfect victim. But in complicated situations like this, where the 2 women, Man and Haley, both acknowledged having friendly conversations with Weinstein after, having consensual sex after, in many cases, prosecutors won't take a chance of prosecuting this kind of case, correct?
I think there are some who would not take that case.
And does this change it? Would that make your fellow prosecutors less risk-averse going forward because of the success of this prosecution?
What you have to hope is that this is something that gets us talking about that, gets jurors, potential jurors talking about that, because it becomes part of our conversation. You know, one of the reasons someone might say, I won't take that case, is because of the thought that a jury would say, all of those emails, conversations, back and forth, I would never do that. No one knows how they're going to respond to that. And these kind of things, except for the rare case, and they are rare, where it's 2 complete strangers, a completely separate thing, it happens in the middle of life. It's messy, it's complicated.
You know, Gina, it seems to me that messy, complicated is a huge thing in this case. But the flip side is he was not convicted on the most serious charges, as I said, the ones that he could have been sentenced to life in prison for. One assumes, even though the jury hasn't spoken of this, that they didn't believe the testimony, the jury didn't, of Annabella Sciorra, which was necessary to make these predatory charges stick. Will that be remembered and focused on here, or the fact that he was convicted of 2 things so important that it causes the impact of those acquittals to dissipate?
Well, like everything with this issue, I think it's complicated, and I'm sure that there will be people who are very focused on the fact that they weren't successful with those charges. But I think overall what I've been reading and hearing is that people are feeling, the positive.
The other thing in terms of prosecutions, Marian, Ryan, that I was not aware was being done commonly, maybe it isn't, but it was done in the Cosby case and the Weinstein case, allowed by judges in both cases, to allow survivors whose cases could not be brought for whatever reason, including statute of limitations problems, to testify in terms of a pattern of abuse. It clearly helped in the Cosby case. I think there were 3 women in that circumstance. In this case, is this a fairly new trend in these kinds of prosecutions?
It's not new. It happens rarely, because you have to have a very prescribed kind of conduct. That the fact that someone may be a person who has sexually offended against a number of women, that's not enough to get a pattern in. You've got to show things about either how they used their power, how they committed the offense. Did they use, for instance, a particular drug? Did it happen under certain circumstances? So you've got to make a very narrow showing of why that's relevant.
And again, after 2 really high-profile, really successful prosecutions, or at least partially successful prosecutions, will judges be more open to allowing that kind of testimony, or is it continue to be as narrowly prescribed as you're talking about a second ago?
I mean, in Massachusetts, we are, as we should be, very protective of offenders' rights not to have all kinds of prejudicial evidence coming in, and also to have the trial not just expand into multiple days because we're doing 10 different episodes. So I don't know that that's going to change a great deal. I think when you can use it, it can often be very helpful.
Can we talk, I mentioned before in the open of this that the Me Too movement began in earnest, and what I meant by that is obviously it started almost 15 years earlier with Tarana Burke, who was not nearly, I think, as optimistic about today's verdict as the two of you. Let me read you what she had to say. This case reminds us that sexual violence thrives on unchecked power and privilege. The implications reverberate far beyond Hollywood and into the daily lives of all of us and the rest of the world. Whether you're an office worker, a nanny, an assistant, a cook, a factory worker, we all have to deal with the specter of sexual violence derailing our lives. And though today a man has been found guilty, we have to wonder whether anyone will care about the rest of us tomorrow. This is why we say Me Too. There have been some high-profile successes, some leading to criminal convictions, some leading to the end of employment and isolation for men. But is this trickling down to real people, Marian, Ryan?
I think it is. I think it is in the way you see workplaces addressing certain issues. I think people in general have gotten more conscious of their own behavior and what's acceptable and appropriate in a variety of circumstances. I think a lot more has been done, especially through some of our providers here in Boston, about letting people know the services that are out there.
Do you buy that? Is it trickling down?
I think there are some significant changes that have been taking place, as Marian was talking about, but I do also think that there just has to be, it's not reporting or nothing. It's, it's about accountability at the workplace. It's about friends calling out friends. It's about family members calling out the uncle. It really is about a change in behavior for everyone, and at much sort of less fantastical things than Harvey Weinstein and actresses.
But the final thing, when you say less fantastical, my attitude, when I'm yelling on the radio about some corporate criminal who's paying a fine, which means absolutely nothing because it's usually tax deductible or whatever it is, I say, if this guy was in an orange jumpsuit, that might cause the next guy to say, I could pay a fine, I'm even willing to maybe lose my job, but I'm not willing to go to jail. Don't you think, unfortunately we can't see in these federal courtrooms, don't you think when a master of the universe like this guy, one of the most powerful people in his industry, is let out in handcuffs by 2 bailiffs or whatever they're called, that has an impact on every man?
That would be good if it did. I do think, though, that most people who do this don't think of themselves as accountable to anyone.
You're nodding in agreement there.
I think that's true. I think people, it will have an impact on some people. I'm not sure it's the people who engage in that behavior.
Well, I hope it does. Good to see you,
Yeah,
Gina.
good
Thanks
too.
so much.
Thank you.
District Attorney, thank you
You're
so
welcome.
much for your time.